Welcome to the debate. Imagine you manage a really successful pop group.
Okay.
You have thousands of dedicated fans. And your strategy for your next big album is to move the group across the country, dress them in funeral black, and completely ban them from speaking to their fans online.
Which sounds absolutely insane.
Right, it sounds like career suicide. But for the Japanese girl group Especia, it was a deliberate artistic choice.
An incredibly controversial one, too. I mean, when we look at Especia, a group active from, 2012 to 2017, we are looking at the ultimate case study in what happens when the ambitions of management and the artists collide head-on with the expectations of the audience.
They started as a 10-member group in the Horie neighborhood of Osaka, right? And they built this beloved identity around an 80s vaporwave, disco, and city pop aesthetic.
Yeah, the Osaka-Horie-based style.
Right. But they eventually downsized to just 3 members, relocated to Tokyo, and completely overhauled their sound into this deeply complex neo-soul, only to, abruptly disband.
That transition, which is known to the fan base as Chapter 2, it completely rewrote the group's fundamental DNA.
Which brings us to our central question. Looking through the lens of those longtime fans and the group's dramatic musical evolution, was Especia's radical Chapter 2 update a fearless, necessary artistic triumph that pushed J-pop forward, or
was it an alienating misstep that fractured their fan base and caused their premature end?
Exactly.
It is a phenomenal tension, because from my perspective, those drastic updates, both musical and structural, they were a fatal misstep. I think they stripped away the conceptual magic that made the group special, and that directly caused their implosion.
And I view their evolution as a spectacular artistic triumph, one that elevated them from a kitschy novelty act to true, ahead-of-their-time musical pioneers.
A novelty act? Wow.
Let me explain. Especia's evolution wasn't just impressive. I think it was creatively mandatory. I mean, in their early Gusto era singing 80s funk and disco parodies produced by Stein and Longer, they were brilliant, but they were a pastiche.
I wouldn't call it pastiche, but go on.
Well, Chapter 2 gave us the Mirage EP and the single Danger, which was produced by Kai Takahashi of Lucky Tapes. They dropped the irony, They delivered complex ambient R&B and genuine neo-soul.
Mm-hmm.
Haruka Tominaga's lead vocals, supported by Erika Mori and the new member Mia Nate Samio, it proved they had entirely outgrown the Idol label. Even if it led to their disbandment, they achieved an artistic peak that paved the way for the J-pop landscape we see today.
Well, while the music in Chapter 2 was technically proficient, sure, I argue that the radical update destroyed the delicate conceptual balance that made Especia unique in the first place.
How so?
The original charm lay in the deliberate distance between who they were and what they sang. You had ordinary Osaka girls wearing colorful Osaka Obachan, like middle-aged lady fashion.
Right, the neon and leopard print.
Exactly. And that was juxtaposed against a hyper-stylized 80s Yokohama vaporwave sound. By moving them to Tokyo, forcing them into serious Arabic-inspired black outfits, and severing their vital parasocial connection with fans by deleting their Twitter accounts, management just shattered the ecosystem.
I think shattered is a bit strong.
But they did. The disbandment wasn't some noble artistic sacrifice. It was the inevitable result of abandoning the foundational identity that made people care.
Let's break down that original identity then, because we need to understand what they were evolving from. When we talk about the early music, we use the term vaporwave, but what did that actually mean mechanically for Especia?
Well, it was a whole aesthetic.
Right. Vaporwave isn't just a synth sound. It's an aesthetic rooted in 1980s corporate lounge music, chopped and screwed, heavily reliant on nostalgia. And Especia leaned all the way in. They had the heavy slapped bass lines, the copious, almost cheesy saxophone solos. It was undeniably catchy.
Exactly. And the magic was in the contrast. For listeners unfamiliar with the culture, Osaka Obachan fashion is essentially the loud neon leopard print aesthetic of middle-aged aunties in Japan's Kansai region.
Yeah, it's very distinct.
Putting teenage girls in these outfits while they sing pristine, nostalgic 1980s synth pop creates a very specific dynamic called gap mo. It's a Japanese concept where the contradiction itself, like the gap between expectations and reality, is what makes the subject charming. The listeners, the fans who call themselves pesses, they were in on the joke. The contradiction was the formula.
But a contradiction is a gimmick, and transitioning an idol group to a serious R&B act is like trying to swap out a car's engine while you're driving 70 miles an hour on the highway.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It is. You are inevitably going to lose some passengers in the turbulence. But if you pull it off, you get a completely upgraded machine. They couldn't remain a kitsy 80s act forever without stagnating.
Why not? Why is a cohesive, successful concept considered stagnation? Framing their early work as something they needed to escape completely misunderstands what Especia was.
I just think it was a caterpillar stage.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. That early sound wasn't an immature phase. It was their defining DNA. I mean, the very name Especia means spice in Spanish. Their early music had a distinct, pungent flavor that separated them from the hundreds of other idol groups. When they shifted to Chapter 2, they lost that spice.
I completely disagree that they lost their spice. I'd argue they just refined the palette. We aren't just using words like sophisticated as an empty buzzword here. Let's look at the mechanics of the Chapter 2 music.
Okay, let's look at it.
On the Mirage EP, they dropped the heavy, producer-driven funk bass lines for complex seventh chords, offbeat syncopation, and organic analog instrumentation. Listen to the a cappella performances they started doing, or the vocal interplay on a track like Nothing.
The vocals were good, yes.
They were incredible. Haruka was delivering these incredibly rich, melodic leads, while Erika and Mia provided intricate, layered harmonies. They weren't just imitating a genre anymore. The early Schlein and Longer production was heavily reliant on the producers doing the heavy lifting. Chapter 2 shifted the artistic weight onto the girls themselves.
They became objectively better technical singers, I won't deny that. But musically, they sounded like a dozen other high-end Tokyo R&B acts. They traded a Michelin-star street food stall for a generic, high-end hotel restaurant. And the cost to the ecosystem was catastrophic.
Catastrophic?
Yes. You have to look at this from the perspective of the longtime fans. The mechanics of this evolution were brutal. They lost 3 beloved members right at the transition point, Chika, Chihiro, and Minari. And then they moved from Osaka to Tokyo.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Let's contextualize that move. Moving to Tokyo is standard practice in the Japanese entertainment industry when an act goes national.
Standard, yes, but culturally devastating for a group whose entire brand was built on Kansai regionalism. To understand this, you have to realize that Osaka and Tokyo are culturally night and day.
Well, sure, they're different.
They are completely different. Osaka is known for being loud, working class, comedic, and incredibly warm. Tokyo is the metropolis. It's polished, fast-paced, and comparatively cold. Moving the group to Tokyo wasn't just a change of address, it was the total erasure of the warm, comedic identity the fans fell in love with. And then, crucially, management completely deleted the remaining members' Twitter accounts.
Wait, hold on. You're framing the Twitter deletion as some devastating tragedy? But realistically, aren't we just talking about management taking away the girls' phones? How does isolating teenagers from social media in a new city make the music worse?
Because you are ignoring the mechanics of the idol trap.
The idol trap?
Yes. In the Japanese music landscape, especially in the idol tier where Especia originated, the parasocial bond is the product. The music is almost secondary to the narrative of watching these girls grow, struggle, and succeed. Fans spend years interacting with them, replying to tweets, going to handshake events.
Right, the typical idol industry stuff.
Exactly. So by suddenly erasing that communication, you aren't just setting a boundary, you are severing the economic and emotional foundation of the group. Management replaced their colorful Osaka image with dark, unapproachable fashion and basically shut the door in the fans' faces. The sudden shift caused immense anxiety among the playlists. You can't just surgically remove the fan connection and expect the financial and emotional ecosystem to survive.
If you're listening to this and wondering, well, why couldn't they just do both? Keep the fun social media presence, but sing complex R&B? The answer lies in how the Japanese music industry categorizes artists. You are either an idol or you are an artist. The line is rigid.
But they were idols.
But they wanted to be artists. The constant daily noise of Twitter, the expectation that performers must endlessly perform their private lives for fans, it traps them in the idol framework. Magazines won't treat you seriously, venues treat you differently, audiences engage differently. By removing that superficial interaction, Especia was demanding that the audience graduate.
But the audience didn't want to graduate. They liked the interaction.
Exactly, which is why it was a necessary growing pain. Without Twitter, fans had to actually show up to the live performances to engage with the group. And look at what they delivered when forced onto the stage. The Hotel Estrella morning shows in Roppongi, for example.
Those were unique, I'll give you that.
They were doing these incredibly tight, live band sets where their undeniable vocal growth spoke for itself. The integration of live saxophone and EWI, electronic wind instruments, it created a live atmosphere you simply couldn't find anywhere else in the J-pop landscape. If you want to be treated like an artist, you have to establish boundaries like an artist.
Okay, but you're completely ignoring the psychological toll that took on the performers themselves. The source material highlights how deeply difficult this transition was. Erica, for example, who was balancing university with the group, spoke openly about how isolating the move to Tokyo was.
It's a tough industry.
But think about it from her perspective. She's in a new, cold city. The direct encouragement and feedback from the fans has been forcibly cut off. And suddenly, there is immense pressure to master incredibly complex neo-soul vocal harmonies. It created a deeply stressful environment.
Well, and the fans felt that stress radiating from the stage. The live shows might have been musically tight, but the joyful, chaotic energy of the early Osaka days was replaced by a sterile, high-pressure atmosphere.
I wouldn't call it sterile. I'd call it mature. And the fans who stayed, the ones who truly listened, were rewarded with some of the best live performances of the decade. The backing band, Hi-Fi City, was phenomenal.
You keep calling this musical evolution a triumph. But if it was such a triumph, if this forced maturation worked so well, why did the group completely implode less than a year later?
Well, implosion is a strong word.
The abrupt disbandment announcement in January 2017 proves that this radical update failed mechanically. They alienated the core fanbase, the Tokyo move exhausted the members, and the conceptual shift failed to attract a large enough new audience to replace the physics they lost. I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because disbandment does not equal failure. Longevity is not the only metric of success in art. Sometimes a project reaches its natural, explosive conclusion precisely because it pushed the boundaries too far.
It absolutely is a metric of success when you're running a music group that relies on touring and record sales to exist. The ecosystem collapsed.
But look at the final product that Collapse produced. The disbandment announcement led directly to their final album, Wizard.
Which was mostly rushed re-recordings of their old songs. That isn't exactly a creative renaissance.
I completely disagree. Those re-recordings are exactly why it is a renaissance. They are the mechanical proof of their evolution. Wizard allowed the Chapter 2 vocal trio of Haruka, Erica, and Mia to reinterpret the classic Especia catalog.
By just pasting new vocals over them?
No, taking a sample-heavy, ironic synth track from 2013 and rearranging it with live brass and tight, three-part vocal harmonies, it bridged the gap between their past and their present. And that led to the final Spice Tour in March 2017, which demonstrated the ultimate success of their evolution.
I wouldn't call that tour a success of their evolution.
We aren't talking about a group that faded away playing to empty rooms in Tokyo. We're talking about double encores in Osaka and Tokyo. The final shows were deeply emotional, euphoric events where the fans and the band merged into one massive dance floor. They disbanded at their absolute musical peak.
Let me stop you right there, because the reality of that final tour completely undercuts your argument. That Spice Tour wasn't a validation of Chapter 2's sophisticated neo-soul era. It was a desperate, nostalgic return to what made them great in the first place.
I don't see it that way at all.
For those final shows, management backed down. They brought back the original, loud Vaporwave arrangements. They allowed the fans to do their idol mixes and be loud and joyful again. The tears shed at the Spice Tour weren't tears of gratitude for the new artistic direction. They were tears of mourning for a group that had been systematically dismantled by its own management.
That's a very bleak interpretation.
The fans realized
And I think the group realized too late that the original, messy, interactive connection was the true magic all along.
I completely reject the idea that the final tour was a regression or an admission of defeat. The members themselves spoke about how they wanted to go out with a massive celebration, combining the polish they had achieved in Chapter 2 with the kinetic energy of Chapter 1.
But they had to bring Chapter 1 back to get that energy.
Because it's all part of their history. Haruka explicitly stated during the final MCs that she viewed every era of Especia as essential. She talked about how the complex vocal harmonies she finally achieved with Erika and Mia in that final year were a genuine joy to perform. Disbanding at that high point immortalized their legacy.
Immortalize it as a cautionary tale.
If they had stayed in their Vaporwave comfort zone, leaning on the Osaka-Obachan gimmick, they might have lasted another year or two, sure, but they would have stagnated creatively. Instead, they took a massive risk, they pushed the boundaries of what a J-pop girl group could be, and left behind a flawless final run of shows.
But as an industry case study, it is a glaring cautionary tale. Yes, if you look at the landscape of J-pop today, you see elements of city pop and ambient R&B everywhere. Especia was absolutely ahead of their time sonically, I'll give you that.
Thank you.
But their timeline shows exactly what not to do when managing an evolving act. You do not take a regional group defined by its accessible, colorful, kitschy charm, move them to the metropolis, strip away their colors, gag them on social media, and expect the financial and emotional ecosystem to survive.
The music survived, though.
The music survived, yes. The Wizard album is a fascinating artifact, but the collaborative space, that delicate, vital dialogue between the artist and the audience, that was sacrificed for the sake of looking serious.
And I think their legacy endures so strongly today precisely because they refuse to compromise the music for the sake of parasocial comfort. When I look at Especia's history, from the infectious, horn-driven funk of Gusta to the pristine, jazz-inflected atmosphere of Mirage, I see a masterclass in musical evolution.
It's an evolution, certainly.
They proved that it is mechanically possible to start as a local novelty act and transform into genuinely sophisticated musicians. The fact that the era was brief doesn't invalidate it, I think. It concentrates it. They illuminated a path for future artists to blend underground aesthetics with pop sensibilities, proving you can demand more from your audience.
I will certainly acknowledge that their discography is stellar. From a purely sonic perspective, tracking the progression from a song like No1 Sweeper to a track like Danger is undeniably brilliant.
It really is.
But as someone analyzing the full scope of their existence, especially from the perspective of the fans who funded that existence, I have to weigh the objective musical quality against the subjective fan experience. Especia's story is ultimately a tragedy of misaligned priorities.
That's certainly one way to look at it.
Management chased a specific musical high at the expense of the very people who built their platform. The emotional weight of that final tour, the tears of the members and the fans, it all speaks to a deep, lingering sense of what if. What if they had found a way to evolve musically without severing their roots? What if they didn't swap the engine on the highway, but actually built a new car together with their fans?
It is a phenomenal tension at the heart of pop music. On one side, the relentless, sometimes ruthless pursuit of artistic elevation. On the other, the foundational importance of the artist-audience ecosystem. We may not agree on whether the trade-off was ultimately worth the cost of the group's life, but we certainly agree that Especia's catalog demands to be heard.
Oh, absolutely.
From the vibrant pastiche of Gusto, through the complex transition of Mirage, all the way to the sophisticated closure of Wizard, it is a journey worth experiencing for yourself.
I highly recommend anyone listening to dive not just into the studio albums, but into the recordings of their live performances. Watch the evolution mechanically play out on stage. The vocal talent and the ambition were always there, constantly pushing against the boundaries of the idol industry.
We started this conversation talking about formulas, how easy it is for an act to find a winning recipe and simply lock it in for mass consumption. Especia refused to do that. They threw out the recipe, they changed the spice blend entirely. And whether that radical evolution resulted in a ruined dish or a culinary masterpiece is something you'll have to decide for yourself when you press play on their discography. Thank you for joining us on the debate.